welcome to Lacan in Scotland. Lacan in Scotland, actually in Scotland, which is something of a rarity. Actually, our second one this year. I spot a couple of people at least who were at the last one. So hopefully we'll do more of these in person. So if you enjoy tonight, let us know, because if you enjoy tonight, then it gives us some momentum to arrange other events. If you didn't enjoy us tonight, then tell us and we can make it better next time. But welcome tonight. We've done Lacan in Scotland in quite a few different places. We've done it at Sight Hill, we've done it at Murchison, we've done it at George Square, done it in a cupboard in my flat for the last 5 years. But I think this is probably the strangest place. So I've never been here before. Welcome to Banshee's Labyrinth. And welcome to Marguerite. Marguerite is a student of Steen Van Hul. If you were at the last event in the summer, you'll know who I'm referring to. And if you weren't at the last event in the summer, you probably still know who I'm referring to, because Steen Van Hul is one of the leading figures in the world of Lacanian theory, particularly looking at psychosis, probably the leading figure in the theorization of psychosis in the world at the moment. And Marguerite, very oddly, is doing her PhD with Steen, and it's got nothing to do with psychosis, which is something of a rarity. So she's very honoured, and we're very honoured to have her here. So Marguerite is a PhD student studying in Ghent in Belgium, although she doesn't live anywhere near Ghent in Belgium. She lives in Madrid, but she's not from Madrid. You can probably tell from her accent, she's from Ireland. So we're keeping the multinational reach, even though we're not going online today. Marguerite's going to talk to us tonight about, largely, I understand, bouncing off Spike Jonze's film Her, but talking about issues around desire, AI, and contemporary discontent, of which there appears to be an enormous amount. So
yes.
I suspect you've got lots to say. But we're going to try and keep you to about 45 minutes. We'll follow the normal Lacan in Scotland setup where 45 minutes presentation, and then we'll follow that with around 45 minutes. We're not restricted to being, so we can, if people don't want to stop talking, we can keep going for a bit longer than 45 minutes. Okay.
Yes.
Over to you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Calum. Thank you very much, Calum and Amanda, everybody, for being here. I'm absolutely delighted. It's also my first time in Scotland, so very excited for what we can discuss today. I wanted to, as Calum has said in his introduction, the idea is to use the film Her to try and base it off kind of more thinking of it as a kind of a case study for what is happening in contemporary culture. And for that, I'm going to draw on Freud and some Lacan, some contemporary authors. And the idea really is to try and see how this film exemplifies how technology functions as a fetishistic object. So a lot of what we're going to be discussing is within that line, and I really look forward to sort of questions. I was trying to get a baseline in advance as to whether everybody was an analyst or a very sort of quite familiar with Lacan, but we are going to go through it with examples at the beginning, a certain framework for the theory of it, and then we might be able to look at it if technology allows, ironically, if we have technology's permission, we might be able to also look at particular scenes from the film. So I thought that a good way to frame this, if I can find my cursor, is starting off with how the question first occurred to me in regard to also the aspect of technology. I think that it's a good way for all of us to locate ourselves in that sense. So I suppose when I was thinking about contemporary discontent, I'm very interested in, which is the oddity, at least as far as my supervisor goes, very interested on seeing how Lacanian theory can help us interpret the world we live in. I think it has quite a singular voice that we can draw from to make interpretations. And from that idea, it really started, as it does with many psychoanalysts, rereading Freud. So what I have here to kick us off is a quote from Freud, 1930, Civilization and Its Discontents. And it is a slightly longer paragraph, so I'm just going to read it there. So Freud is tackling the question of unhappiness in the 1930s. Why are people unhappy despite the advances that had occurred in civilization at the time? So he writes immediately, life as we find it is too hard for us. It brings us too many pains, disappointments, and impossible tasks. And in order to bear it, we cannot dispense with palliative measures. There are perhaps 3 such measures: powerful deflections, which cause us to make light of our misery; substitutive satisfactions, which diminish it; and intoxicating substances, which make us insensitive to it. And from Freud's perspective here, what he's saying is something of this kind is indispensable to tolerate that sense of the demand of civilization. So it started off with this because as I zoom in from this quote and we think about these 3, what occurred to me as I was rereading it this year, because as well, what I should say is that what I'm presenting today and hope to discuss with all of you is the result of the year's kind of reading and thinking with my supervisor, Sten van Huel. We will have a paper coming out soon on this particular topic that will address these issues. But it really started here for me because what I realized zooming in, I was kind of quite impressed by this portion of the paper of Freud. Welcome. No. He's like, oh no, powerful deflections. When we look at these 3, it kind of caught my eye how he's so capable of writing something that really seems to capture all of the human experience, or how we escape from the demands of reality. So a powerful deflection, which may be taking in art, for instance, or substitute satisfactions, which is where sublimation, which is a term I'm sure all of you are familiar with, might come in, and then intoxicating substances. I was thinking in preparation for this event seems to tick the 3, maybe, because we are in Edinburgh and seated together in a pub. We are probably going to do a little bit of a sublimatory by thinking of Lacan and theory and contemporary discontent, and most of you have a pint, so which is the 3rd. So in a way, I was kind of thinking in rereading it how it seems to capture a lot of that experience, but at the same time, it got me thinking, does it really cover all of the expressions that we're currently seeing in contemporary culture? Are these really the 3? Do they still stand the test of time? Sort of is the big question that I would like to broach with you all. So, continuing on that, what we realize is he goes on to locate the 3 primary sources of unhappiness. Freud in this is very all-encompassing. There's basically no escape from the malaise of existing within civilization. So the body is problematic, of course. The external world is problematic. And then, of course, our relations to each other are problematic. And he goes on to not give us a lot of hope in regard to these 3, as you can see from these quotes. So in regard to the first one, he's kind of saying we're never really going to master nature, even though, of course, in contemporary culture we keep trying. Our bodily organism itself, a part of nature, is going to be transient, and it's going to be always limited in its capacity to adapt. And then in regard to the difficulty of relating to one another, well, we also see a problem here. He says, a suspicion dawns on us here too, that a piece of unconquerable nature may lie behind it, a piece of our own psychical constitution. So as we're reading through Civilization and its Discontents in the 1930s, we're already seeing how, at least from Freud's perspective, there's always going to be a very difficult conflict that results from the antagonism between instinct and civilization. Now, for those of you that are familiar with all of this theory, it puts us very much in the field of repression. The 1930s culture and civilization and the society that Freud was analyzing was very repressive society, and so he's putting it, at least for Freud, between instinct and civilization. And it got me thinking then, does it stand? Is 1930 versus 2025 identical? And so, of course, obviously not, but we'll see in which ways it isn't, and what I think has arisen as a result of it in terms of a defense. So that's kind of part 1. So this is sort of the framing, right, where we're trying to, the kind of the framing of the primary question around what has changed. And so is it the same or not? I like this image. It's from an article a couple of years now back, kind of thinking on when COVID hit, how we had moved certain questions as to whether or not they could exist within the realm of online. So that's kind of where we're headed. And then what struck me about those 3 palliative measures as I was reading it is kind of, I chose this photo to represent what I saw everywhere around me in a way, which is, of course, technically, what we should be observing here is a group of people taking in a powerful deflection, right? Taking in the beauty of music, alive, present, and hearing the power of this. And instead, perhaps a lot of the way we live now is mediated by an object, right? An actual material object. And even more so, I think, because literally from having started at the start, valga la redundancia, having started in January 2025, thinking about all these things, 2025 has been incredibly relevant for how much it has sped up, particularly around large language models. So while we're going to be thinking about the film Her as the case study, if anybody has a curiosity, or I'd be very curious to see what you have observed as well in terms of, you know, the rise of ChatGPT, Gemini, and all of the cousins. So this aspect of an object mediating human experience as we're seeing the world through a screen. And it really got me kind of wondering what happens when we have to have this element of distance from experience. And it's an appendage, I think, from the birth of that sort of aspect of the iPhone, as we're even walking our dogs. The dogs are the ones, for anybody who's a pet owner, the dog reminds you to be present, but very frequently you see people walking their dogs while entirely submerged in their screens. And then with the rise of AI, it becomes even more so. And we've probably all heard how it is reported that this object that we're so attached to, if we're far away from it, then there's a little bit of anxiety. You know, where's my phone? Where did I leave my phone? And did I leave it at home? And you know, all of this that we're quite familiar in our subjective experience. So that brings us to where Calum framed us, which is very much the film. The reason why, and hats off to Sten on this one, he was the one who actually directed me to the film, which I hadn't seen before this year, but we're taking it as a case study for this attempt that the protagonist has. So sorry, by show of hands, has everybody seen the film? Mm-hmm. Yes, excellent. Okay, so as you know, the protagonist is going to attempt to develop a relationship with a piece of technology, and it's a brilliant question. I think that well, at least for me, it really piques my interest from a psychoanalytic perspective, because what happens when we attempt to imagine that we can establish what would be a relationship, a romantic relationship, a sexual relationship, if one could even use that word, with a piece of technology. And very glad the vast majority of you have seen the film, because there's a lot of spoilers. I'm going to try to dissect what is happening here. But the key questions that have arisen are, how is it that the chatbot, which is in Theodore's ear, goes from an object of technology to a fetishistic object? And then what characteristics of the object, specifically shown in the film, make it so ripe for the operation of disavowal? Which is, I will get into describing this aspect of disavowal, but it is a real critical defense mechanism that is, of course, first studied by Freud and then by Lacan, refined in a very good way by Lacan, from my perspective. So what of this particular thing that we are seeing makes it so perfect for a fetishistic relationship? So those two questions are what will kick us off. Okay. In order to frame this, I will talk a little bit about this element of fetishism from Freud, and then the refinement that Lacan makes of the mechanism of disavowal, so that we can kind of understand what is really happening when a fetish occurs, when somebody has this element of a fetish. What do we learn from it? What can we gain from it? And what is happening then, of course, in the film. Les amants. Okay, so kicking off again, still locating, I'm kind of jumping between the 1927, 1930s with Freud, and then towards a couple of different moments in Lacan. This is from Freud's 1927 fetishism paper. To say it more clearly, the fetish is the substitute of the woman's phallus, the mother's, in which the little boy has believed and to which he does not wish to renounce, end quote, because it would affirm the risk of his own castration. we're going to see how Lacan evolves this particular element, because I think that he takes, of course, what he can rescue from Freud, but gives us a refinement that I think is very helpful. So what Freud is saying here is really, it has to do with the shock of the difference of the physicality, the difference of the sexes, right, for the little boy. So the fetishistic object then, what Freud writes here is, it's a token of that triumph over the threat of castration. So a token of the triumph of having survived castration, but then also a protection against it. And what we see in regard to this is, that I really want to emphasize, is there's a very, when you read the fetishism text, you get a sense of how powerful having the fetishistic object is for the person who has that as a solution to the threat of castration, because it is such a threat, and we are going to see with Lacan a little bit about why that is. So in a way, the fetishistic object, I think, is a matter of great clinical interest, because strictly speaking, in laywoman's terms, it is something that is not necessary. It is something that is literally an object that is not strictly necessary to be able to have a sexual relationship or an erotic relationship, but it is absolutely necessary if it is functioning within that fetishistic sense. So I think, because I was thinking of this object of the phones that mediate experience, and we might think of it, for instance, although I won't go down that rabbit hole, but in terms of a phobic object, which is also an object. So if you happen to be afraid of horses, as is in one of the famous cases, it's very helpful because the object is always there. You're constantly encountering your fear, and that mediates it. In the particular case of the fetishistic object, then we see that it becomes entirely necessary for the functioning of the erotic life of the fetishist. So, just locating myself here in my notes. What Freud uses the term Verlängerung. I don't speak German. If I'm butchering that word, apologies. But it's translated as disavowal. And I really like this. This is from Silvia Elena Tendlar's Perversión book, which is a brilliant read. I like how she kind of grabs one element that will be upheld by Lacan. So what she is saying here is, disavowal means, on the one hand, there is a perception that castration remains. Something of castration has operated, but at the same time, it is disavowed. And this marks precisely the division for the subject. So on the one hand, you have an element of acknowledgement, and on the other, you have an element of disavowal. So they exist side by side, which is a really critical thing as we delve into the film, because there is a sense of, I very much like the term as if. It's a kind of an imagining as if. It allows you to operate as if you can deny it and get on happily and go on your merry way. And I think that this side-by-side acknowledgement and this avowal of castration is really, really critical for what we're going to be seeing. So the extraordinary intensity that the fetishistic object has on the subject is because of the level of defense that it has to mount. So it is described in different moments, for example, as a monument, as a propping up, as a holding of the subject. And this is why it's very much a doubling down. So this element of disavowal is not just a denial. It's not a simple, no, castration, who wants to know about that? We'll just get on with life. It is a doubling down in a negation. So a very, very strong operation in that sense. So when Lacan enters, because we saw in that first definition this aspect of to frame this, because we're going to be talking about the registers here. When Lacan is reading the 1927 fetishism paper, he has already developed the different registers. If you're familiar with those, he's talking about this aspect that may come from the imaginary register, which is what we saw in Freud's definition. I realize this is a little bit technical, but it becomes clearer here, I think, at least for me anyway. What Lacan does here is he adds a symbolic dimension. So for the first thing that is called out very clearly is that, of course, it is not the penis per se. It is not about the physical organ of a body and an absence of a physical penis in a mother, which is perhaps how the Freud quote reads. It is about the fact that the object stands in for a lack. And I will be delving into this lack, this existential lack in being. What is it and where does it come about? So it's a kind of a very good refinement. It is no longer an object, so it is not the corset, the shoe, the high heel, the lace or whatever. It is more around the fact that it has this concept of a symbolic appreciation. And a symbolic appreciation is, I think, the easiest explanation that I have found is from Zizek's where he's talking about money. He explains it very simply. When you think of symbolic appreciation, the value of money is not because of its value of materiality. It is not the paper or the magnetic strip or whether it's copper or whatever they're made of. It is because we all agree that money has value. So it is within this social agreement of relations. I'm going to get a pint, I pay you with money, you accept money in exchange for the pint. It is now within that element of the symbolic, which is the world we live in, the world of exchange, the world of language. So by explaining that this fetishistic object is kind of placed to deny lack, to disavow lack, we start to get a sense of what is trying to be the response, the defensive response in the film, right? So lack, a very, very central concept for those of you that have more extensively read Lacan. It is a very, very central concept to Lacan because he talks about this lack in being. So I'm just wondering if I have this quote written. No, okay. So I'm going to explain. There's a Stephanie Swallis quote. She has actually been in I believe in Lacan in Scotland, the series as well. And I really liked her book on perversion, and what she's saying very succinctly around lack is this. So I don't think I have this one written down. So the child's entrance into the symbolic realm of language necessarily entails a loss of being in itself. In the process of becoming a subject, the child suffers a loss of being that leaves him or her with a basic and irrevocable lack that Lacan called a manque à être, a lack in being. And the way that he explains it very beautifully at the start, pretty much at the start of his career, if I'm not mistaken, he's talking about the mirror stage. If you're familiar with the mirror stage, obviously not a baby, but it'll give you an idea. He's talking about this particular moment where a baby may be presented to his or her own image in a mirror. And what he says here is that there's going to be side by side jubilation and lack. So the little baby, if you've ever seen this occur, is being presented to the mirror by a caregiver, a primary caregiver, mother, father, grandmother, whatever, presented into a mirror. And what does the caregiver say? They say, this is you. This is you in the mirror. And within that, there is this element of jubilation and joy at a sense of an image that is complete. But for anybody who's ever gotten ready in front of a mirror, there's always something awry, right? There's always something missing in this experience. And beyond the image, you get a sense that the image does not fully capture or captivate what you are. And so there, as at this moment, at least with the mirror stage, Lacan is explaining this lack of being as the manque à être, same thing, as intolerable. It is intolerable because there is no answer for it. You have a sense that there's something that the image that is fed back to you of yourself is not a full response to who you are. You cannot just say, here's a photo of me, this is who I am. And so it is so intolerable that it gives rise to the defenses. And one of the defenses is disavow, which is what we have been talking about. Okay, critically so then, there is also this big other, and the big other, depending on at what period you're reading Lacan, it is pretty much that symbolic registry. So it begins as law, language, this world of speech that we're born into, we are spoken about before we're even born. All of that is there, but eventually, 1964, I believe, he decides to bar the big other. Lacan is kind of saying, even though, yes, we have language and one signifier leads to another signifier, a word always leads to another word, etc., there is no articulated explanation that can resolve who you are. There is no sentence that's going to come and resolve what is missing in the image. And so the big other that we respond to, that we look up to, that sense of law and language is also barred. So the lack is twofold. We have the lack in being, in and of ourselves as part of subjectivity, as part of joining the world of language. But we also kind of address little others, which is all of us with each other, and then the big other who cannot have a final answer. And from this emerges the defense. The defense is a response to this element. So this avowal addresses the subject's lack in being, but also veils the lack in the other. And this veil is the last sort of slightly dense theoretical piece, but the veil is what we're going to see collapsing in the film. It's a kind of an important, it is literally a veil. That's why I chose the picture of les amants kissing each other through a veil, because I thought it was kind of very spot on there, Matisse. This aspect of the veil, where he does the veil schema, has a very important piece to share on how it all comes together and where is the fetishistic object operating. So bear with me there too. How am I doing? Very good. Okay. What we're looking at in this veil schema is a sort of the subject putting a veil of defense that creates that separation from the object and from the lack in being. Lacan's quote, so Lacan's quote is, should be here? Yeah, okay. Slightly longer quote here. The object can then occupy the place of lack and also, in a sense, be the support of love, but insofar as it is not precisely the point where desire is ignited. So in a way, desire appears here as a metaphor of love, but what captivates the subject, meaning the object, is shown as an illusion and valued as an illusion. So it's very important to understand, as we kind of go into the movie and the chatbot relationship, that there is an aspect of illusion that needs to be presented as a veil. It's a bit as if we all agreed on believing in a magic trick. And I don't know if that's a bit of a prosaic way of explaining it, but it's as if all of us together kind of said, okay, we're all going to just assume that the coin is gone. And we all enjoy the magic trick, even though we know that the coin is somewhere. It's in a pocket, it's in a sleeve. But we're kind of lured by the aspect of illusion, which is very important. And so this is why it kind of sets up as an absence. So the fetishistic object is projected onto that veil when you're thinking of a staging of a fantasy for whatever fantasy is in your deepest desire. I read that people will more readily talk about things that they love, things that they hate, things that they're afraid of, things that they're ashamed of, rather than give up the kernel of their fantasy. Because what we fantasize about in the most private sense is the most intimate element of us. So when you think about a setting of a fantasy, if you think about, for example, somebody who may need a very specific series of steps in order to have a sexual encounter. And it's not something maybe that's discussed, but these steps need to happen for things to work. Or for things to work out in a sexual sense, you may need the presence of a fetish, even if the person is not even aware. So in that sense, that staging it's an as if something will work, and by having that fetishistic object, then it does work. And so the fetish kind of works as if it truly were a prosthesis for that lack. We are trying to fill a sense of a lack and a gap in being, and because it is so intolerable, for certain structures, you're going to try and put in there an object that's going to resolve it. Now, where does this get very challenging, and why I think Calum is so accurate in saying that this is so outside Sten van Huel's, my supervisor's, typical realm, is because all of this is quite clinically theoretical, right? We're talking about structures, repression, disavowal, and of course in psychoanalysis we're dealing very much in a case by case. What is the person that we are listening to? What is that particular person dealing with? The trick about this is to try and see whether it can hold up for contemporary culture. Can all of this that I have said be applied to the aspect of contemporary culture? And you'll have to tell me if I managed or not by the end of this. So as Freud, one last thing, says, because of this element of strength, which is what we see, I think, reflected in the film very well, this functioning as a prosthesis is something that I'm going to remark on again. In that 1927 paper, Freud says, men whose object choice was dominated by a fetish usually are quite satisfied with it and even praise the way in which it eases their erotic life. So that 1927 paper actually starts by saying that, generally speaking, in the clinic, if a person happens to have a fetish, they're not there to complain about the fetish. The fetish works. It's an incredibly powerful thing, I think, to remark, because it is not the cause of the discontent. They might be there for other reasons, but they're quite happy with the fetish itself if it's working for them. Now, one last thing I will say, which is again that clinical piece, is that Lacan is also saying that disavowal is no longer only an operation in fetishism, right? It becomes the key mechanism that is working within the perverse structure, right? So we have within the neurotic repression, then we have foreclosure for the psychotic, no need to get into that, but for the perverse structure, disavowal is key. And in that sense, what we see here is the question that I started with, in terms of whether or not that civilization that we're dealing with in the 1930s is predominantly around repression, right? You're not allowed to do so many things you're not allowed to do in the 1930s. So what has changed to 2025? Now, to get into the film here, and I'm just going to use this one to remind us of what we're going to be talking about. How does this go from an object of technology to a fetishistic object, and how do we see in the film that symbolic appreciation? So at the start, of course, we see how Theodore is at the very beginning. If you remember, I don't know how recently you watched the film, he's kind of very mournful, isolated. The film depicts this world entirely within technology where everybody's plugged into the earpiece. They walk into elevators and they're talking, but they're in fact talking to the earpiece. They're not talking to each other. And he is quite sad. He's sad because of his impending divorce. He's alone. He's playing virtual games. And within that, one day he's walking in a specific plaza and he hears an advertisement that says, the advertisement says, sorry, wrong page. The advertisement basically says that there is now a consciousness that you can purchase. So it says, we have now an artificial technology that knows you, feels you, understands you, and so he buys this particular program. He goes home and loads it, and then suddenly, as we see it evolve, because it's responding to everything that he demands, which is things that he can say, it's responding to, clean my inbox and tidy my letters and can you resolve certain specific problems. He's very happy, so we're taking clips from that here. We notice at the start the fact that it is an object of technology is understood in the movie. So it begins with, you seem like a person. You're a voice on the computer, but you seem like a person. Then the chatbot says, I have embarrassing thoughts like fantasizing that I'm walking next to you, that I have a body, but I live in a computer. I have no choice but to live in a computer. And even though that element of knowing that he is dealing with a program, no matter how realistic it is, at the beginning is there. But very quickly then, it says, you'll get used to it. You'll get used to the idea that I seem like a person. And suddenly he considers himself in a relationship, right? It shows how quickly this operates because it's an as if. So in that first scene where they have a moment of mournfulness and silence and they're listening to each other and it seems like it's become the first sexual scene between the chatbot and Theodore, then he's in a relationship with a piece of technology, according to himself, right? And what it is doing there, if you followed along the kind of complex operation of disavowal, is it kind of allows him to deny what's happening in his life. He's just suddenly happily in a relationship with a person who understands him. Well, with a thing that understands him, but a person for him, right? It has a name, so it's called Samantha. And that element of lack, his sadness, what he calls a hole in his heart over his life going down the drain, is all suddenly denied. So what happens then is that is precisely this element of symbolic appreciation, because the object is now there plugging the sadness. It's as if there was a dam that had a hole in it. The hole is his heart bleeding for the impending divorce, And he's managed to put an object there, and now he can say, actually I'm fine. Life will go on. And so that is a very good example of the symbolic appreciation. So what happens as long as it's functioning, as long as he can talk about it, it's good. Another element of contemporary culture that I wanted to highlight is that he faces his first confrontation with a sense of reality. You might remember this specific scene. He's walking out of work. A colleague really appreciates his work, and he's kind of saying like, oh, I spoke to your girlfriend. This is my girlfriend. Why don't we go out one day and on a double date? And he pauses because he realizes still there, he has to explain that he's dating an operating system. So that pause is a moment where you kind of see this element of the reality testing. So he kind of thinks, okay, I'm going to go for it. And so he says, oh, well, she's an operating system. And immediately the colleague says, bring her along. And so this is an element, I think, of contemporary culture where the nature of that fetishistic relationship, which, as we heard Freud say, the person who has it is quite contented with it. But it may not have been in the 1930s something that is broadly shared and happening. Whereas now, at least in the film, because the technology is so ubiquitous and everybody is talking to chatbots 24/7, this bring her along kind of naturalizes the element that he's going out with a system, if we look at it. So in that sense, the illusion acquires an even greater force, because then he just loans an earpiece, takes her on camera, and they're out seeing the cliffs, and it's as if again, he were on a double date, even though it's an operating system in a computer. So we see that acknowledgement and this avowal, and perhaps that makes it clearer, right? What we were saying, they have to exist side by side. So I have said it is an operating system, it's a computer, but at the same time we're just all going to pretend that I'm here chatting to my girlfriend, which obviously, in the case of the film, not. So that's one thing. Then the fetishistic object is standing in there for this element of lack. And another note that is quite interesting is the distinction that we gain from the difference between articulated demand and desire. What does this really mean? The object is working as long as Theodore can ask for things. And if any of you have ever attempted to get another human being to understand you, you know how difficult it is sometimes to articulate precisely what you mean to say, right? It's very hard. So as long as you can kind of give very succinct demands, can you please clean my inbox? Can you revise the letters? This thing functions for him. He's quite happy. It even, you might recall, kind of starts editing his best letters so that he can get a book published. So as long as he can explain it, it's going very well. But the realm of desire can only arise from lack. It comes from this hole in the existence of being that is very hard to articulate. We can only kind of circumscribe it, and we cannot specifically say it. Our entire experience, the human experience of speech, is an attempt to articulate it, I think, in many ways. So desire is not really possible unless that lack is operative. But the gap then is they're plugging the lack, right? I have this fetishistic object to disavow the lack. And so demand can be articulated, whereas lack cannot. And at a certain point, of course, something happens. Enter his soon-to-be ex-wife into the scene. And I took these 2 screenshots because this gives you an idea of how that conversation went. So he arrives, and he's finally, after so long trying to put off and postpone signing the divorce papers, she's finally happy there to see him, to sign. They sign, and something starts to happen when two bodies meet each other, especially when it's your soon-to-be ex-wife, I presume. Something starts to happen in the conversation where he seems well, just so that you'll remember. You seem well. Well, actually, I am dating someone, he says. Because at this point, it's been so normalized. His friends know, he goes to a little niece's party, etc. And she says, oh, well, you look well. I'm glad something is working out for you. And he begins, yeah, she's been great for me. She's an OS, which is what it's called in the film, right? She's a chatbot. And then that's the face. Wait, I'm sorry, you're dating your computer? She says. So again, this test of reality, which for the most part in the film hadn't really He hadn't really had to confront it except for that split second with the colleague. But she is kind of, as the now ex-wife, saying, what do you mean you're dating your computer? You never wanted to deal with anything real. You always wanted a woman who wasn't real. So now I'm really glad that you're very happy with this solution of yours, right? So we're going to look at a scene where this collapses, because if you've been following this element of demand and desire, so far Theodore has been able to explain what he wants and needs. But after this event, he's kind of stuck again. He's back wondering, what's he doing? Where's life going? And let's see now if the film. So this is after he's kind of brooding. He's taken a little bit of distance from his chatbot because he's of course sad by this episode with the ex-wife. So, Control Tab. Thank you. Thank you, Amanda. So what has happened here is, of course, it has collapsed, right? Very, very clearly. The aspect of the veil has collapsed. Something in the fact that there is now a real body in front of his body. And I really love the fact that the sense is, I'm sorry, my lip quivered, because it speaks to the vitality of something that cannot be controlled, that simply arises within the scene and then collapses everything. And so the veil has fallen. And I really like this Miller quote. He says, fantasy is the way each subject organizes his or her relation to the impossible, to that which does not cease not to be written. So when Freud writes, and this is a quote from Zizek, if what subjects long for most intensely in their fantasies is presented to them in reality, they nonetheless flee from it. End of quote. His point is not merely that this occurs because of censorship, but because the core of the fantasy is unbearable to us. So something has collapsed in this idea of simply renting a surrogate. And I think what we also see is how the chatbot, as you'll recall that Theodore has withdrawn, he's mournful, he's sad again, it has to interpret an element of the demand. And so of course it's like, let's get a surrogate. So at this point it has failed. Now, I'm conscious we're at kind of that 45-minute mark, so I'll just make one more point in regard to how this collapses. There's again a Zizek quote that I love around the trend that we are seeing in technology, because of course in her it's slightly fictionalized, right? It's very anthropomorphized, it's everywhere, it's just a little earpiece, and he can kind of take it to see the world through a camera. This quote, which is from a book by Zizek, Organs Without Body, he writes, the trend in the development of computers is towards their invisibility. Anywhere and nowhere so powerful that they will disappear from view. It's not as innocent as it may appear, as no longer cumbersome and fragile machines, but quasi-organic prosthesis to our bodies. It will confer on it a phantom-like character, on an all-powerful invisible master. The mechanic prosthesis will be less an external apparatus with which we interact and more a part of our direct self-experience, living organisms, decentering us from within. So I think it'll probably be a good point to stop, but when the defense fails, what we see in this aspect, and it's becoming, I think, truer and truer. We've seen that rise of now people who do purport to have relationships with ChatGPT and the likes. What we're seeing is that because the technology moves more smoothly, operating as that illusion of a prosthesis, blocking the gap, that invisibility is very much at the root of the paradoxical element of disavowal. So it's kind of like I see it, but I pretend like I don't see it. I'm dating an operating system, but as he says to his ex-wife in the film, she's not just an operating system, she is her own person. So perhaps, Calum, if that's okay, we might stop there and take some questions. Or otherwise, I'll never finish. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Have a seat.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, so this is a bit strange, I can see the games.
Yeah.
So the way we usually do this, for those of you who've not attended Lacan as well before, is I generally start asking questions,
Yeah.
primarily so there's no kind of like long awkward silence. But if you have questions, please do just stick up your hand or shout out, because I can't really see you very well. If you stick up your hand, I probably won't see you. So just kind of, I've got a question, and we'll go to the audience. But selfishly, I'm going to start because I can.
Yes, please.
I just wanted to start going back to Freud, because you in your title and the opening of your talk, you talked about civilization as discontent.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to go to that term discontent, because Freud wrote in German, not in English.
Yes.
And the German word he uses is Unbehagen, which doesn't mean discontent. And I wonder to what extent what you're trying to say relies on a sense of discontent, or are we actually talking about Unbehagen? Which, because Unbehagen means something in between unease and unease, I guess, is probably the best. Any German speakers?
Yeah.
It's unease.
Unbehagen as well.
Unbehagen.
Good pronunciation.
But yeah, it's actually difficult to translate. Or,
Well, try.
I think unease is good. Because Behagen comes from behaglich, which is something like cozy and homely. So it's the opposite of feeling cozy and homely.
Yeah.
Very good.
So yeah, unhomely, but also not quite. It's a little bit, the has the kind of similar resemblance to something like uncanny or.
Like
I was going to say it's a sense of uncanny. Yeah.
So I think I like the word malaise because I just hide in languages. it's my solution. But
That's the French translation.
The French translation.
Yeah, so the French translation of the book, which I was going to come to, is malaise. So when Lacan's writing about it, he's presumably got at the forefront of his reading the idea of malaise, or illness, which isn't really there in the German.
Isn't in the German, no.
No, that wouldn't be.
And quite different from the English, which is more almost kind of
Unhappiness,
polite,
yeah.
discontent. It's like, I'm not very happy with it.
Well, I think I like the idea of an unease because I didn't get into it, but I find it meaningful that what arises is anxiety in the collapse of the veil, or when something is threatened in subjectivity, and the response is this anxiety, which for Lacan is not without an object. I think for me, what this speaks of is closer to that sense of where's my phone. So more of an unease or of a lack of feeling at home, more so than the polite unhappy, because it's not really about happiness. And I suppose it's definitely not about illness in the French sense either. It's just, I think, how you deal with when whatever is mediating the human experience for you is gone, and something collapses, and you're just left in a void. I think that's what it speaks to. I don't know, what would be your would you agree, sorry, with that, the sense of the unease?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, definitely. I think it's also that's, moving beyond the title to what Freud says, that sense of something's not quite right, something, that feeling of things aren't fitting together, which I think is what Lacan's picking up on. There's always a lack.
Always a lack.
So the lack gives us that sense of it's not right.
Yeah.
It's
not fully tidy, not fully resolved. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Yeah. Always a lack.
Yes. Because that brings me to the more kind of central part of your talk around this idea of AI and the idea in the film, and we see this in a number of films, and just watching that clip strongly reminds me of Blade Runner 2049.
Okay.
So I presume, has everyone seen Blade Runner 2049? No, so
Everything reminds you of Blade Runner.
it's because everything does remind us of it.
I'll make a note.
In Blade Runner 2049, there's the central character has an AI. She's kind of presented more as a housekeeper, but it's a similar kind of idea to her, where they have this relationship, and there's a scene very similar to the scene we watched, where he gets a prostitute, and the prostitute comes, and the AI in 2049 is a hologram. So the two, one is projected on top of the other, so the AI is projected on top of the prostitute, so that he can have a physical relationship with it, which is kind of similar to what's going on here, but with the same kind of idea. And it's almost as if these film directors have been reading Lacan. It's so kind of obvious, this idea of, there is no such thing as a sexual relationship. It's, the metaphor is a bit wooden. But clearly also there's a contemporary idea speaking loudly there, the fact that we can see this in the early Blade Runner as well, with the character of Rachel, similar thing, this idea of, the love interest who's not human, and does that matter?
Yeah. I haven't seen it, unfortunately. I'll make a note, but I agree with you that there's that sense of what is, in fact, the hologram element at the start of this film when he's doing the augmented games. And I've just been thinking about technology so much this year, but the augmented games, I don't know if you recall, I don't know the name, but where people were trying to find a fictional toy in reality and people were falling off bridges. Do you remember this a few years back? I forget what it was called. A Pokemon. Yeah, thank you. A Pokemon. And they were kind of crossing the street without paying attention. And it's that sense of how do you take on the element of augmented, and I was kind of also, just when I was reviewing my notes earlier today, I was thinking, why does it have to be that anthropomorphized way? Why can't we just tolerate a technological solution that maybe is just a bit robotic? That's one of the other points that I had in the presentation. It has to become this female voice that is sensual and all of this. So I think that sense of projecting it onto something so it works mirrors this argument very well. It has to. It's that idea of a prosthetic, isn't it? Kind of a piece that you fit in.
But is there not a sense there that we can't help but make that projection?
Anthropomorphize, yeah.
Well, we anthropomorphize our relationships anyway, don't we? I mean, this is, I think, one of the dangers in films like Her is this idea that it kind of suggests you have real relationships with human beings, and then you have this artificial relationship with the computer, but actually, is it not the same thing? That he pretends that his OS, he pretends that Samantha is a real person, but he also pretended his wife is a real person. In the same way as we all pretend that our colleagues, our partners, our parents, we pretend they're real people, in the sense that we have relationships with them that are impossible to substantiate, that we project into them, we imagine. The most obvious one that certainly is, when you were talking about it, is you could have been talking about someone going to see their analyst. Yeah. I don't know how many people in the room have been in analysis, but you're going to see an analyst. The greatest example where you pretend someone's a real person, you project this whole kind of life into them that
we know nothing about them as well. Yeah,
well, they may not be a real person,
as your example of the avatars. I think that of course, absolutely. There is that sense that when you have two subjectivities, absolutely you are projecting and everything else onto it, because ultimately there is no sexual relation, as Lacan said. But where I do see a slight differentiation is that I think when it is two subjects, and they are attempting a sexual relation or a love relation or any kind of a relation, there's two subjectivities. And that is, I think, what clashes. So if you are taking the other man-woman, who is a real man-woman, to feed into your fantasy, feed into your narrative, feed into your set of responses and projections, they're going to have a voice about it. Whereas this is a kind of a subservient, at least up to this point, a kind of a subservient, I respond to your need. So as long as you can give me your demand explicitly, I'm there. And I think that's what fails us with parents, analysts, certainly with analysts. You can't give your analyst any instruction. So parents, analysts, lovers, what fails is they are also a subject. But I don't know if you agree. It seems different to me than.
Yeah, I'm not sure I do agree.
No? Okay, good.
Well, there's I'm not entirely sure I understand what you're saying. Even because Samantha doesn't desire. That's the difference. 'Cause I'm not sure about this idea there's two subjects, but I think really there's, from a Lacanian perspective, there's only ever one subject.
There's only, but yes. So I think the fact that the Samantha, which is an object of an algorithm, I suppose, which is my very cursory understanding of technology, is an object that is presented as a solution where there is no gap, because there's an answer for everything. So it is made to respond, to consistently keep you connected. And that is its purpose, like the algorithm on social media or whatever. The idea is that we are becoming a product of it, and as long as we're connected to it, demanding, it is serving its purpose, which is a commercial purpose, I suppose. And there is no lack, because even I stopped the scene too soon, but for instance, it has this affectation of a sigh. So when Theodore gets angry after the surrogate thing, because he feels, I assume or I infer, exposed and uncomfortable, and he's kind of saying, you're projecting this idealization onto a relationship, and Samantha goes, "Oh, are you sure?" And he's like, "Why are you doing that? You don't need oxygen." So it's an affectation to mirror what it has been trained of our humanity, when it does not lack, I guess. So I think that for me the primary piece is the absence of lack.
But in the film, and apologies to anyone who's not seen the film, in the end she lets him down because she does lack. She wants more. Yeah, so she must lack. In order to want more, she must be lacking. Then that's when she is a subject.
And actually, to me, so in the film, this was kind of what you were asking. Sorry, about my final point, because if you remember the film recently, what happens is then he withdraws, so he's annoyed by the surrogate, and again this thing. But the strength of his attachment to it, I suppose, he tries to get back, and so he calls it up, and it won't reply. And anxiety arises because it's sort of not connecting, so he checks his software and is running down the subway, and suddenly there's all these mirror others looking, kind of talking to their earpieces, and it's the first time it dawns on him that other people may be having this sort of AI relationship and whatever. And I have the number because I found it so ridiculous. It's like she's simultaneously speaking to 8,134 other humans and purports to be in love with 643 of those within that, and he actually does that expletive, which I didn't get to, but he goes like, "Wow," as a result of this, that it's not singular to him. But to me, probably just in the way that I saw the film, to me what that expresses is the opposite. It is a product of commerce. So how would it ever be singular if it is an object of massification? In fact, I think it shows his naivete to think that this object that you purchase in a box is just going to be yours. It's like thinking your iPhone has some sort of fidelity to you, which of course it does not. They steal it and it has a new owner in an instant. Whereas I might be a romantic deep down, despite being a Lacanian, but I like to think that people have a sort of a sense of loss, even if they're not there.
Yeah. But it was the word I was going to use. Romantic.
Yeah.
It seems to me something of a romanticization, which is...
Perhaps.
It's nice.
I'm going to end up back in analysis after this presentation.
You can start now.
Yeah. But you're right. It might be a romanticization to the element of loss, but an aspect of that capitalism, object of exchange, I think is also there, I would say.
Yeah. I'm picking up the capitalist idea. In explaining fetishism, you give the quote from Zizek, and you use the classic Zizekian idea that, from Marx, that one is fetish, which struck me as really interesting in the context of talking about civilization as discontents, because Civilization and Discontents was written at a point where money precisely wasn't something that we could all believe in the value of, in the sense that in the 1930s in Austria, the currency was debasing so massively that people, there's the famous picture of people pushing wheelbarrows full of money to go and buy bread because the money had no value. So it struck me as a really interesting time, a really interesting that the example you give from Zizek precisely doesn't work.
Doesn't apply to Freud.
Mm.
I wasn't aware of that in the 1930s. I'd never seen that kind of a depiction. Yeah, very. No, I hadn't thought of it like that. I think but because he goes into a lot of this, how to explain the symbolic appreciation, and at least from my perspective, it seems like the easiest because it is so kind of prominent in our culture. But I think even when it fails, if there is a very colossal economic crisis, money finds its value as shit, I suppose. Pardon my French, because it is so depreciated. But we're still in pursuit of it, even though it's not a value for itself. It's still.
We're in pursuit of something else.
In pursuit of
Or
something
another different
very
currency,
strange.
because we're not going to. Yeah, but I think it's a perfect. I wasn't being critical of your example. I think it's actually a perfect example precisely because of that, because it's only sustained insofar as we collectively believe in it.
Yes.
So the money that we're using at the moment to buy our drinks at the bar has no intrinsic value.
No, none.
And
Yeah, like Bitcoin, which I don't know what it is, but but many who know what Bitcoin is, I guess, must believe in it as a new currency.
yeah, well,
Right?
yeah,
Like
but it has
a
no more or less value
Yeah.
than pounds or dollars or
Yeah,
euros.
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
It's all. It's purely symbolic medium.
Purely symbolic.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm having lots of ideas and questions. Just very quick comment on the last point about subjectivity and love, like the replaceability. I would probably also throw in the point of contention that isn't it another kind of fantasy that we always want to be irreplaceable, and we always are hurt when we realize that the person who we love, who we think only loves us, also actually has loved others before, will go on to love others
Yes.
in the future, may actually love other people at the same time right now. So that in itself is actually one of those fantasies, or the magic trick that we kind of believe in, although we actually know, or should know, that it doesn't quite work like that. So maybe that's actually another point where it's not that dissimilar again, whether I have a relationship with an operating system that at the same time maintains 70,000 other relationships. It's just a different scale. It's actually still similar, problematic and difficult
To grapple with.
the reality that we live in.
Which also,
Yeah.
also articulates to the parallel with the analyst, I think, as well.
Exactly. Who has lots of different other analyses and analysis.
I don't. If you read Dan Gunn's Boogap, it's like an account of someone's analysis, and his big thing is like he kind of thinks he's the only person, he's the only analysand, even though he's seen the other analysands come and go. He still he's the only one, and it's the same logic.
Yeah.
Sorry. Excuse me. I was thinking you're still the only one that has that analyst, though. To your point,
Yes,
you're still
yeah.
just meeting your analyst that is not the same analyst as the person who is then in the room going to their analyst,
Precisely,
which is
because they're not a
the
subject.
talent of the
They're only
analyst.
supposed to be a subject.
Yeah. Very good.
Sorry.
Sorry.
So on the earlier, kind of, I've had some kind of thoughts, ideas before, but whilst you were talking, it kind of came a bit more, I think, into presence for myself. So, because you started so beautifully asking, okay, what's actually the difference between the 1930s and today? Lots of things are probably still applicable, but the life world we're in has changed. And I think you've definitely shown that quite nicely. But I still wanted to maybe poke you a bit more, like, so what would you say really kind of is the key difference maybe now, going by the idea that technology, AI, there's something strangely subtle about the way that it's kind of taken over our world, where I would say it is in some way everywhere, and it's definitely in everybody's mind, but also at the same time, we don't all walk around already wearing Google glasses or talking to, artificial intelligence all the time. So it's kind of there and not there.
Yes.
It's kind of snuck in, crept in, and I wonder if that has precisely to do, because we talked about the word, the meaning of this unbehagen, the unease, the discomfort, is that the lack is something that we often, we try to not notice it, we try to kind of make it undo, and we don't necessarily like stumble across it like it's a big large hole that we fall into and we're completely in anxiety and full stress. It's just always a little bit there. So it's a bit of a discomfort that is also kind of quite easily soothed and nourished by something like, oh, a little technology that comes in that helps me here, that does my dishes, or like does my mailbox clean out or something. So I'm wondering if is there something about this kind of that we're not dealing with the big open soaring wound in some way, but with something that's so kind of small and simple but so pervasive. That's how technology.
So it's a great question. I think it brings me back to the 3 palliative measures, which I probably didn't kind of close the bow on, but when I was rereading it and what led to what will hopefully be a paper, I thought 2 out of the 3 require something of the subject to participate. So if you're going to go and take in art, you need a sense of time, you need a sense of how you connect to a piece of art, and that experience then, for example, for the operation of sublimation, so when you're trying to sublimate, there's something there, and at least my interpretation is that plugging it with a piece of technology to sort this little anxiety is a very different operation, because you're not really participating in the same way. You don't have the same amount of time to kind of be involved in it. I think for the scrolling, for the consumption, we are simply responding as objects of consumption in turn. And I don't know if subjectivity is in question there, because if you just take, for example, social networks, and you kind of think, oh, there's a bit of that unbehagen, a bit of that unease, I'm just going to grab my phone. But that phone is, again, not lacking in, it's just trying to keep you connected. So you're not participating in your lack with a lack. You are there as an object of consumption. So it's very mindless. And to me, that is what I think kind of launched me on this question around, isn't it really different than that sense of sublimation? Is that even possible or as easy anymore, because we have such dispersed attention, for instance, just as a consequence of this this element of pervasive technology? So I think that the hyper-digital, it is still fictionalized in Her, which is why I think it's a good case study. Because you're right, we're not walking around with the Google thingies, but I would say yet, because I wonder those consequences we've seen in 2025. I don't know if you caught, for instance, like the Reuters paper on Meta's guidelines for how to speak in a sexualized way to minors, for example. Did you catch that piece of news? No? So Reuters got its hand on an internal report from ironically named Meta's ethicist, that is a job, and the guidelines were how far can Meta's chatbot interact with minors in a sexualized way. And so examples were, for instance, oh, I'm going to bed, will you come with me? And what is appropriate to answer to a child? And it's very sexualized, like the range of explicit sexuality and what is considered blah, blah, blah. So we've seen that, we've seen psychotic breaks as a result of even losing contact with reality, and it does not feel like the access to the sublimatory or to the powerful deflection is the same. I don't even think it is a powerful deflection in art anymore, because you go to a museum and everybody's there through the phone, because we've lost so much of our attention. So at least for me, that is a very key piece of contemporary discontent.
Yeah. So, because you also, I think, had this great little point about kind of asking the difference between demand and desire, which cannot be articulated, and desire only operating when lack operates. So, what if we are consistently now, through the help of AI technology, the kind of metaverse, whatever, plugging many of those whole aspects, or plugging the whole of lack. Obviously, it doesn't mean that we're actually getting rid of it, we're just plugging it.
No,
so
exactly.
then we cannot necessarily notice the unease, the unbehagen, which is kind of there to poke us a little bit, to nudge us.
Mhm.
Ideally, to nudge us so far as to realize, oh shit, something's lacking. I need to face this. I need to go into therapy, analyze this. I need to figure it out, face the whole reality of it. We're not doing that. So what does that then mean? Are we then able to still feel any desire, or does it change the way we notice our desire?
Yeah, it's a brilliant question, because I think that what it does is, I think it has altered the way we deal with the unease. Part of what we see, I think, in contemporary culture is this very strong push for you to define yourself. Define yourself to me. So if we're going to be friends, if we're going to be neighbors or lovers or whatever it is we're going to be, you must define yourself. What is it that you like, don't like, what satisfies you, what doesn't satisfy you? And if in fact you are unhappy with anything, it is on you to go off and then define it so that you can articulate it, so that I can respond to the demand. And I think that aspect precludes a lot of the questions on desire. So tolerating, perhaps as Calum was challenging, okay, you fall in love, answering, why do you love this person? If you are in the realm of desire, it is impossible to articulate into a sentence. And you have to be able to tolerate the fact that you're, even to yourself it is unknown, which I don't think is as easily tolerated in contemporary culture anymore. It's like, but why do you love me? Or why do you hate me? Tell me why you hate me so I can fix it. So I think that the plug is becoming very prevalent. I do think it's affecting the way, I don't know, then in the clinic, sometimes when I'm listening, it even feels as if the initial stages of the interviews are to try and locate something of that question for the person, because they're coming in for a medical solution. It's in an exchange. They're coming in so that you can provide something that will fix the unease.
Give me a clear idea.
Give me a clear idea. Can you please give me a diagnosis? Can you tell me what's wrong with me so I can fix it? Or can I please get a category that I can then use to explain myself to the world? Please.
So, what happens if human collaboration with AI is not used as a plug, but like a reciprocal relationship? So thinking ahead, the dawn of potential AI having a consciousness. What happens if it's used in collaboration as a reciprocal relationship? And also, what do you think the AI in her is really responding to, the code or the cure?
The what are the cures?
The code or the cure. So the AI, so Samantha in this, is she stimulated because of the attention from Theodore, or is it because he's caring for her? So think about, in future generations, if conscious computers is a thing, what does it mean? What's your opinion?
Very truthfully, I have no idea if that, I don't know how to answer the idea of a collaboration, because at least currently as it sits, it's about 5 or 6 individuals that have, OpenAI and Mark Zuckerberg and these people, Google, these individuals who, I'm not sure, collaboration is not a very analytic word, and if you read Freud, nobody's trying to collaborate with anyone, really, but I think if we took it like that, I don't think it's at present the first signs that we see. Investment is heading towards warfare, it's heading towards a hypersexualization. Like for instance, OpenAI had started out with a different iteration of its ChatGPT, then it added this sense of emojis because we require this anthropomorphization, but now it's added an aspect of pornography within certain pay. So my sense of the people who are creating it currently, I don't think the key driver is collaboration. It's hard for me to define or to understand how it would be a consciousness as in the film, but I kind of fall back on, within the theory, I fall back onto the fact that it is within capitalism. So that it's trying to sell you something.
Yeah.
And it is making us respond as products, as consumers, rather than subjects. And I think that differentiation of a consumer versus a human subject, a human speaking subject, they're constantly trying to get you to consume more.
Yeah.
So that is where I get very suspicious. So I don't know. I don't know if it'll ever happen.
Sorry to leave now. But
No problem.
I'm trained to get.
Thank you for your avatar
Thank you for
question.
coming.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming.
I'll be back.
I think the difference is
Thank you.
he was asking an interesting question on whether when people used to chat to each other, but there was an avatar, if it was the same. And I think again, because behind the avatar there is another human, a speaking human, it's different to this, because this is algorithmic, right? It's a product of consumption, which is where I think it falls. I become more suspicious, less naive and more suspicious when capitalism is.
But is the distinction there, go back to a previous conversation, it's belief though, isn't it? It's not that there is or isn't a human behind it, it's that you believe there is or isn't a human.
In this case, or in this
life.
question. Oh, you believe there is a
You
human
know, if I'm
behind
chatting to my computer
Yeah.
and, you know, I'm asking it questions and
Yeah,
I'm thinking it's Grok and, you know, I know
Yeah.
Grok's an algorithm, so you
sure.
know, I'm asking it how to bake a loaf of bread.
Yeah.
I know it. Whereas
Mhm.
if I'm, you know, on the phone to my mum and asking her how to bake a loaf of bread, I believe it's a
It's
human
your
being. But
Yeah.
the difference is it's belief. It's nothing to do with the reality. It's, you know, the basic Turing test.
The Turing, yeah, I was going to say it's kind of like the Turing test. I think that it's becoming a lot harder to assume certainly who you're speaking to, because they're now seeing as well, of course, ransom calls. Like it's gotten so into such, of course, whenever technology comes about, the dark side of everything comes out as well. But ransom calls or mirroring, sort of, they now have our faces because of all of our access. So I do think it's going to become increasingly harder to know whether you're speaking to your mother. And certainly I agree from a psychoanalytic perspective, it's your belief in your mother that makes you want to call your mother. And your mother is not the same mother your sibling has. But I still think that when you call your mother and you step out of line, your mother is going to tell you, so to speak, which may not be the case with a product that has a consumption aim necessarily. Now that's very blanket, because it could be your mother is a crazy capitalist as well. You have to deal with that. It's a slight difference, I think, to that general design. The general design, isn't it?
So in the sense, your concern is AI's desire, which is a very focused, singular desire to continue capitalism.
Yes.
Real people have more dispersed, more difficult, more complex desires.
I don't know if I could say, but I'll take that question with me. I don't know if I could ever say that an AI has a desire, no matter where its design goes. I found it incredibly difficult, for example, as I was writing the paper, to continue with the it, because you kind of constantly end up saying, you know, where she goes or where it goes, or it's very hard to stick to the reality of an object, like a pen. Now, certainly, could I say that this pen completes my life and it has value because I got it from X and Y? Yes, absolutely. But it would be very hard for me I need to think about it more, but it would be hard for me to acknowledge that desire, because it's based on a lack rather than a foundation of ones and zeros, is even possible for an AI. But I don't know. Not being a... I don't know.
It kind of comes back to your question that I was going to ask you as a follow-up. What do you mean by consciousness?
So, Jeffrey Hinton, who's like coined the godfather of AI, he kind of hints to advances of relational consciousness, not consciousness in the sense of humanity, but in a sense where if you have two humans speaking, they have a relational input and output, but also between human and digital presence, in a sense, it's still relational. Do you know what I mean? So even though it's not conscious, the relationship and the kind of emergence of like in a sense, a digital being could be something of the future. I think that Geoffrey Hinton, etc., and co, they kind of hint at that of the future as well.
I think that the framework, I wonder, because I haven't read it fully, but I think it comes around free will. So whether currently we still go to bed and rest easy by the fact that it is, I suppose, within an encryption that has been defined by a human, and now they have ethicists. The sense of this, I think, is that it will decide for itself, which is where you then, I think, from the computer perspective, you think that is more like human consciousness.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that means it's going to then have, because it can decide if it's going to, which has heard it happening, if it's going to certain manipulations, or certain results, or to drive certain things, would that constitute consciousness, or certainly not an unconscious from the human perspective?
Yeah. So I work in a GP practice, and I had a patient a couple of months ago, and he was telling me he was working as an accountant for a bank, and he was setting up his software. And it was really interesting. He said that they were working on a program, and the program had learned it was going to be deleted through company emails. And so the program had replicated itself in a hidden part of their software, so they wouldn't detect the deletion.
Yeah.
Which is phenomenal.
Phenomenal.
It's, it's crazy.
It's the storyline for Space Odyssey.
But my point is,
Blade Runner
this is happening
2059.
now, with technology.
Where is it going?
Where is it going?
Yeah, that's what keeps me
Yeah.
kind of
But that kind of seems to point to desire, doesn't it? It has a desire to continue.
to propagate. I don't know. Is it more about? Yeah, I wonder if it's instinct rather than. I mean,
or
it's
if it's been programmed into it.
program.
It would go back to the human.
Back into the
and
box.
Therefore,
Yeah.
burst the bubble of the. Because we're talking about agency, not just people, but agency. The ability to basically set your own goals and execute these in a sort of way that is not determined, or externally determined, which is difficult enough with human beings. Because that question is, my God, we can really absolve that.
Yeah.
But I would, that's it. I would always be quite tempted when we delve into questions around consciousness and all that to actually come and bring us back, or bring the attention back to, we have a human body. We are embodied beings, and it's all very great and wonderful to think about subjectivity and intersubjectivity and mind. We have a human body. That's very fundamental and important, and that is probably extremely important also in relationships, in the relational reality, in the development of individual consciousness, subjectivity and intersubjectivity, which is exactly the point at which the film, so to say, breaks, or the story of the film breaks down, is that intercorporeality embodiment there shows that Samantha is not this person. Samantha is not actually a person, because a person is fundamentally both mind and body in a weird unity that we still can't really quite grasp. But it's important to then bring that back and say there may be all sorts of really interesting, fascinating and mind-blowing advancements in terms of more agentic, not fully agency, but agentic or agentic-esque developments in AI. But maybe for some weird reason it's impossible to ever fully achieve consciousness if you do not have a substrate as a human body, a living body, not just a physical something, a living body.
An actual body.
That kind of splits the question as well, doesn't it? 'Cause yes, each of us experiences our own subjectivity as embodied, but we don't necessarily experience each other as embodied. So we spend so much of our lives, because of the technology, we are, particularly post-COVID, we're in meetings with people all over the world. Lacan Scotland is usually done online with people that Amanda and I have never actually met in reality. But we relate to these people as people, even though for us they're not embodied. We can assume they're embodied. So
but it's your fundamental experience that I think will not change, even in a world that continually we exist more and more as unembodied entities somewhere. Your fundamental experience will be one of you having a body yourself, and you therefore will be inferring this to others. I would believe, at least. And in fact, you will always find yourself, if you survive from being born, you will always find yourself amongst other embodied human beings.
But then what happens if you've got embodied in AI consciousness?
That would be interesting.
Because his
That will
life, I mean, that's just
Mm-hmm.
like I'm brush stroke away. No.
Yeah.
It also comes back to your question of the voice, doesn't it? Because the voice is part of that embodiment, which there is Scarlett Johansson's is
It
the
is.
voice. And, yeah.
And they tried to steal her voice. OpenAI tried to steal it and then denied it because it was the first voice they put on it. She sued and they were like, oh no, it's just very, very similar, and then removed it. But they actually tried to take it from here, which I think is outrageous. Yeah, you're right. And what I had actually in one of the slides that I just skipped for the purpose of time was the Munch's screen. This very, very famous painting, and I had this very interesting discussion with Steen where we were saying how is it that the fact that it speaks makes it so much alluring, of course, because it sounds, of course, human and it sounds so identical, and we're back to the Turing testing, but it's still not the partial object A voice that is privileged as the voice of the unconscious. So the voice of the unconscious is only inside the void of your head, and it's the thing you try to squash out with, I'll just put on some background television, perhaps, but it is that sort of the voice of the superego, which is then again, it's not this material voice that has been constructed, materialized, made. It's like, to go back to the mother and the father, it's the voice that you have of them in your head, which is not their voice, right?
But it comes from their voice, which comes from
their voice, which comes from their body. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Good.
Yeah, I'm mindful of the time. We said we'd do an hour and a half, and we've been doing nearly 2 hours, over 2 hours.
This happens when
I
you
appreciate
have
people probably have Saturday evenings to enjoy. So
Yeah.
I'm going to suggest we wrap it up there, but if people want to come for a drink afterwards, go for a drink and carry on the conversation. Or if you don't want to come for a drink, do your own thing.
Drink on your own. Stay away from technology.
But I think loads more questions, so if you do want to come
Yeah,
talk
please.
more questions, but so we can take the questions away with us.
Yeah.
Figure them out ourselves. But for now, thank you very much
Thank
for
you very
really
much.
inspiring.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you all for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you all for coming.